The last thing Vanessa Diaz left behind wasn't a suitcase. It was a sentence. Upton Diaz was 39, a night shift facilities technician at St. Bartholomew Biomedical Foundation in Raleigh. Most people knew him as the man fixing broken doors at 2 in the morning. The man with the faded work boots, the dented silver Tacoma, and coffee stains on his lunch cooler. What nobody around him knew was that he had once built a career finding lies hidden inside numbers. On a humid Thursday night, Vanessa stood beneath the yellow loading dock lights and said, "One day you'll regret not fighting harder for me." Then Upton's eyes dropped to the gold donor badge hanging from her purse. The badge belonged to Preston Whitmore. And suddenly, the divorce was no longer the most interesting thing happening. Before we go any further, tell me where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel, and if you like slow burn stories where the truth matters more than the shouting, consider subscribing. Tomorrow's story starts with a missing inheritance and ends in a courtroom nobody saw coming. The campus covered nearly 40 acres on the northern edge of Raleigh. Glass buildings, research labs, donor plaques mounted on polished stone walls, landscaped walking paths that looked more like a university than a biomedical foundation. Every morning, executives arrived in German luxury sedans. Every evening, most of them went home before sunset. Then there was Upton Diaz. His shift started at 10 p.m. Most employees never saw him unless something stopped working. A door jammed, an elevator stalled, a cooling unit failed. A motion sensor started blinking red. Someone would submit a ticket. Several hours later, the problem would be gone. That was usually the extent of their interaction with him. The younger employees often didn't know his name. Maintenance guy, facilities guy, the night technician. People referred to him the same way they referred to office furniture. Useful, forgettable, permanent. 3 days after Vanessa walked out, Upton parked his silver Tacoma in the employee lot at 9:42 p.m. The truck was 12 years old. The driver's seat had a tear near the left side. The dashboard clock ran 4 minutes fast. He never bothered fixing it. The security gate recognized his badge automatically. The guard barely looked up. Evening? Evening. That was the entire conversation. Inside Building C, fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The maintenance office sat behind a storage corridor filled with air filters, electrical supplies, and spare components. A metal locker, a desk, a coffee maker older than some of the interns. That was Upton's kingdom. He placed his lunch cooler beside the desk. Turkey sandwich, apple, bottle of water. Exactly the same meal he had packed most nights for nearly 2 years. Then he sat down and opened the work order system. 37 tickets. Nothing unusual, a faulty access reader, a leaking faucet, 2 temperature complaints, 1 damaged parking gate arm. Normal, routine, predictable, the way he liked things. Outside the office window, rain tapped softly against the glass. Upton glanced at the empty space on his left hand. The pale circle where his wedding ring had rested for 11 years remained visible. He looked away. Then he returned to work. Because there was nothing else to do. At least that was what everyone else would have assumed. Years earlier, Upton and Vanessa had lived in a 1-bedroom apartment near North Carolina State University. The carpet had stains they could never remove. The air conditioner rattled every summer. The upstairs neighbors argued almost every weekend. Back then, they laughed about everything. Money was tight. Their combined checking account sometimes dropped below $300 before payday. Yet, neither of them seemed bothered. Vanessa worked entry-level donor relations. Upton worked in corporate auditing. Some nights they ate frozen pizza on lawn chairs because they couldn't afford proper furniture. Somehow those years felt larger than the expensive house they eventually bought. The change happened slowly, almost invisibly. First came promotions, then conferences, then donor dinners, then private charity events, then invitations, then introductions, people with larger houses, larger bank accounts, larger opinions. Vanessa adapted quickly. She had always been smart, always ambitious, always able to read a room within seconds. Within a few years, she became one of the most recognizable faces inside St. Bartholomew's fundraising division. Donors remembered her. Board members requested her. Executives praised her. She belonged in those rooms. At least that was what everyone said, including Vanessa. Especially Vanessa. Upton never complained. He attended events when asked, wore the suits, shook hands, made polite conversation, then returned to his ordinary life. The gap between them widened anyway, not because of money, not because of success, because they stopped valuing the same things. Vanessa admired people who commanded attention. Upton trusted people who didn't need to. The difference seemed small at first. Then, Preston Whitmore entered the picture. The first time Upton met him was 18 months earlier. Preston was a real estate developer whose name appeared on half the luxury projects around Raleigh and Durham. Tall, silver-haired, perfectly tailored. The type of man who never appeared rushed, never appeared uncertain, never appeared to sweat. He donated millions. Entire buildings carried his family name. People laughed before he finished jokes. People listened before he finished sentences. People moved when he entered rooms. Vanessa admired him immediately, not romantically, at least not at first. She admired what he represented: influence, access, status, possibility. Over time, Preston's name appeared more frequently at home, then even more frequently, then constantly. Preston loved the proposal. Preston thinks the board will approve it. Preston invited several major donors. Preston says the expansion project is moving ahead. Sometimes Upton would look up from dinner and realize she had mentioned Preston 6 times in 10 minutes. He never commented. He simply noticed. Noticing things had always been one of his strengths. Months later, other details followed. Tiny details, almost laughably small. Vanessa started carrying her phone everywhere. Bathroom, kitchen, laundry room, patio. She used to leave it on tables without thinking. Not anymore. Text message notifications disappeared faster than before. Screens turned dark when Upton entered rooms. Late-night donor meetings became common. Then normal. Then expected. One Saturday afternoon, she returned from Charlotte 3 hours later than planned. Her explanation came before his question. That alone told him something. People often revealed themselves when trying too hard. Again, Upton said nothing. Again, he observed. And observed. And observed. One rainy Thursday. Nearly 6 weeks before Vanessa left, he walked outside to retrieve a tool bag from the truck. As he passed her vehicle, something caught his eye. The infotainment screen was illuminated. Bluetooth history. Most people would have ignored it. Upton didn't. 2 devices had connected recently. Vanessa's phone. And another vehicle profile. Whitmore Bentley GT. The screen timed out before he could see anything else. He stood there in the rain for several seconds. Not angry, not shocked, not even surprised, just still. The way someone becomes still when separate pieces suddenly begin fitting together. Back inside the house, Vanessa was making coffee. She smiled, asked how his day had been, asked if he wanted dinner. The performance was flawless. The problem was that Upton had spent years examining inconsistencies, and once he noticed one inconsistency, he rarely stopped looking. That night, he lay awake listening to rain strike the bedroom windows. Vanessa slept beside him. Her breathing remained steady, calm, untroubled. Around 2:13 a.m., Upton finally closed his eyes, but one thought remained. Not a conclusion, not an accusation, just a question. Why had Vanessa's phone been connecting to Preston Whitmore's Bentley? And why did the answer already feel inevitable? The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. Heavy cardstock, embossed lettering, cream-colored envelope. The kind of invitation designed to make people feel important before they even opened it. Vanessa placed it on the kitchen counter while Upton was making coffee. "Foundation Gala," she said. "Do I need a tux?" She looked up from her phone. "No, suit is fine." Then she returned to typing. The conversation lasted less than 10 seconds. Still, Upton noticed something. She hadn't asked whether he wanted to go. She hadn't even phrased it like an invitation. It sounded more like an obligation. 3 days later, they drove to the Mayfield Grand Hotel in downtown Raleigh. The event occupied the entire ballroom level. Valet attendants moved luxury vehicles through a brightly lit entrance. Large banners displayed renderings of future medical research facilities. Waiters circulated carrying trays of champagne. Photographers stood near sponsor backdrops. Everything looked expensive. Everything was supposed to look expensive. Vanessa transformed effortlessly in environments like this. The woman who barely spoke during breakfast suddenly became magnetic, confident, animated, perfectly composed. She knew names, remembered details, remembered spouses, remembered grandchildren, remembered donation histories. People loved that, and Vanessa knew they loved it. The moment they entered the ballroom, she was pulled into conversations. Board members, department heads, donors, executives. Within minutes, Upton found himself standing alone near a display describing a future cancer research wing. He didn't mind, being alone had never bothered him. What bothered him was pretending, and these rooms contained a great deal of pretending. A few minutes later, Vanessa returned. A tall donor couple had approached. The husband extended his hand. "Vanessa, wonderful to see you." She smiled. "Good to see you, too." Then she turned toward Upton. For a second. Only a second. But long enough. "This is Upton." Nothing else. No husband, no introduction, no context. Just Upton. The donor nodded politely. "What do you do?" Before Upton could answer, Vanessa did. "He works in facilities." The donor smiled. "Oh." That single syllable carried more information than a paragraph. Conversation over. Interest gone. The couple turned back toward Vanessa almost immediately. Within moments, Upton no longer existed. The interaction lasted less than a minute. Yet, something remained behind. A feeling. Not anger, not embarrassment. Recognition. Because this wasn't the first time. Over the past year, Vanessa had gradually stopped introducing him as her husband. Sometimes she forgot. Sometimes she avoided it. Sometimes she chose titles instead. Facilities technician, maintenance, operations support, labels. Labels were useful. Labels simplified people. The problem was that labels were often wrong. An hour later, dinner began. Round tables filled the ballroom. A live jazz trio played near the stage. Crystal glasses reflected warm light across the room. Upton found his seat assignment. Table 12. Vanessa was seated elsewhere. Table 3. Near the stage. Near donors. Near Preston Whitmore. Not an accident. The seating chart had been carefully planned. He noticed that immediately. The person assigned beside him introduced herself as a pediatric surgeon. Across the table sat a pharmaceutical executive. Another seat belonged to a regional banker. Everyone discussed investments, expansion projects, research grants, political connections, the language of influence. Upton mostly listened. Listening revealed more than speaking ever could. Halfway through dinner, applause erupted. Preston Whitmore had arrived. Even seated across the room, he commanded attention. Nearly 6'3", silver hair, perfect posture, tailored navy suit. The confidence of someone accustomed to entering rooms already knowing he was the most important person there. People stood, shook hands, laughed, gathered around him. From table 12, Upton watched Preston greet Vanessa. Not as colleagues, not as strangers, something in between. Familiar, comfortable, practiced. Again, he said nothing. The evening continued. Speeches, presentations, announcements, donation pledges, future initiatives, projected budgets, projected growth, projected success. Then something unusual happened. While attendees mingled between presentations, Upton wandered toward a display area near a temporary administrative station. Several event coordinators worked behind laptops. Financial summaries appeared briefly on one monitor. Most people walking past would never notice. Upton did. Numbers always caught his attention. One line item appeared for less than 3 seconds, then disappeared. Vendor payment authorization. Emergency infrastructure services. Amount $186,400. The vendor name flashed only briefly. Still, Upton memorized it. Keller Infrastructure Solutions. The name felt wrong. Not because he recognized it, because he didn't. And he should have. Facilities work flowed through his department. Major infrastructure projects required coordination, documentation, approvals, contractors, inspections. A payment that size should have been familiar. It wasn't. The monitor changed screens. The information vanished. Yet the name remained in his mind. Keller Infrastructure Solutions. He repeated it silently. Twice, 3 times, then moved on. Later, during dessert, Preston finally approached table 12. Several donors rose to greet him. He shook hands effortlessly. Then his eyes landed on Upton. Recognition appeared immediately. Upton! Interesting. He remembered the name. Preston extended his hand. Strong grip, direct eye contact, the practiced confidence of a man who spent his life negotiating. Good to see you again. You too. Preston smiled. Vanessa speaks highly of the Foundation's facilities team. Facilities team. Not husband, not spouse, not family. Upton noticed. So did Preston. The pause lasted barely half a second. Then Preston moved on. The conversation looked harmless, ordinary, but something about it felt deliberate, like a message hidden beneath polite language. Hours later, the event finally ended. Guests filtered toward elevators and valet stations. The ballroom slowly emptied. Vanessa found Upton near the entrance. She looked exhausted and irritated. Not at the event. At him. Ready. Sure. The drive home lasted 27 minutes. Rain streaked across the windshield. Traffic was light. For most of the trip, neither spoke. Downtown lights disappeared behind them. Suburban roads replaced city streets. Then Vanessa finally broke the silence. You could have tried harder. Upton kept his eyes on the road. At what? Socializing. He waited. She continued. Networking. Still waiting. You looked uncomfortable all night. I wasn't. Vanessa laughed softly, the kind of laugh that wasn't actually amusement. You never belong in those rooms. The words settled heavily inside the truck. Not because they were loud, because they were honest. At least honest from her perspective. For several seconds, neither spoke. Rain continued striking the windshield. The heater hummed softly. A red traffic signal reflected across wet pavement. Finally, Upton nodded. Maybe. Vanessa looked surprised. Perhaps she expected an argument, a defense, a protest. Instead, she received agreement. The light turned green. The truck rolled forward. The conversation ended there, but not inside Upton's mind. because as Raleigh slipped past the windows, two thoughts remained. One was Vanessa's comment. The other was the vendor name he had seen on that monitor. Keller Infrastructure Solutions. A company connected somehow to a payment worth nearly $200,000. A company he had never heard of. A company that suddenly felt important. And before the week was over, he would discover something that should not have existed at all. The invoice appeared at 1:17 in the morning. Upton wasn't looking for it. That was the strange part. People imagined discoveries happened because someone chased them. Most of the time, discoveries happened because something felt wrong and refused to leave. For 3 days, the name Keller Infrastructure Solutions had lingered in the back of his mind. Not loudly, just enough. A splinter under the skin. A detail that didn't belong. At 1:17 a.m., he was reviewing a routine maintenance request involving a rooftop cooling unit on Building E. The work order referenced a previous repair completed 6 months earlier. Nothing unusual there, except the repair description included a contractor code. KIS-447. Keller Infrastructure Solutions. The same company. Upton stopped typing. His fingers rested on the keyboard. Then he opened the attached documentation. The invoice loaded. Total amount $186,400. Emergency HVAC stabilization. Critical infrastructure preservation. Temporary environmental protection measures. The wording sounded impressive, expensive, professional. There was only one problem. None of it had happened. Upton knew because he had been there. 6 months earlier, a cooling sensor failed during a weekend shift. The repair took 42 minutes. 2 replacement parts, 1 technician. Total material cost under $800, no emergency contractor, no infrastructure stabilization, no specialized vendor, no 6-figure expense, nothing remotely close. He read the invoice again, slowly, line by line. The numbers didn't merely look inflated, they looked invented. Outside rain struck the building in steady waves. Inside the maintenance office, the clock moved past 1:30. Most people would have reported the discrepancy immediately. Upton didn't. Experience had taught him something important. The first suspicious document rarely mattered. The pattern mattered. One document could be a mistake. A pattern was something else. He opened the vendor database. Keller Infrastructure Solutions appeared legitimate at first glance. Business registration, tax identification, corporate mailing address, vendor approval status, everything required, everything clean. Too clean. The address caught his attention, Suite 400, a business park outside Durham. He copied it onto a notepad, then continued working. At 2:11 a.m., he finished his shift assignments and drove across campus. Building E stood dark except for security lighting. The cooling unit mentioned in the invoice sat on the roof, exactly where it had always been. Upton climbed the access ladder. Cold wind pushed against his jacket. He inspected the equipment. The serial plate remained unchanged. Installation date unchanged. Repair history unchanged. No evidence of major contractor work. No evidence of emergency replacement. No evidence of anything costing $186,000. Only the same equipment he remembered repairing himself. He stood there for several minutes, listening to the machinery hum, thinking. Then he pulled out his phone and took photographs. Not because he planned to use them, because documentation was a habit, always had been. Back in the maintenance office, he began checking historical records. 3 invoices, then 5, then 11, each connected to Keller Infrastructure Solutions, each carrying unusually high amounts, each involving facilities projects. Projects Upton either remembered personally or could verify through maintenance logs. One invoice claimed emergency pipe replacement. Never happened. Another referenced structural inspections, never performed. Another described temporary environmental containment. No corresponding work orders existed. By 4 a.m., a picture was beginning to form. Not a complete picture, but enough. Enough to make him uncomfortable. At 4:36 a.m., he opened the vendor registration file. That was where he found the first real problem. The contact number listed for Keller Infrastructure Solutions connected directly to voicemail. No company greeting, no directory, no receptionist, just a generic mailbox. That alone wasn't proof, but it wasn't good either. At sunrise, Upton drove home. The house felt larger since Vanessa left, not because of its size, because of the silence. The kitchen remained exactly as she had left it. Coffee mugs, cookbooks, a decorative bowl she insisted on buying during a weekend trip to Asheville, evidence of a life that had recently existed. He made breakfast, eggs, toast, coffee, then sat at the dining table. For the first time since the separation, he opened his laptop for something unrelated to work. He searched Keller Infrastructure Solutions. The results were surprisingly thin. A website, a business listing, several vendor references, nothing substantial, no project photos, no employee profiles, no industry mentions, no local news coverage. Nothing. For a company receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars from a major foundation, it had almost no footprint. That bothered him. Real companies left fingerprints. This one seemed determined not to. By noon, he had found the business park listed in the registration documents. The property contained 17 office suites. Upton drove there, not because he intended to investigate, at least that was what he told himself. The building looked ordinary. Brick exterior, shared parking lot, professional directory near the entrance. He stepped inside. Suite 400. The address listed for Keller Infrastructure Solutions. The directory showed something else. Executive Office Leasing. Not Keller Infrastructure Solutions. Not even close. He checked twice. Same result. Suite 400 wasn't occupied by a contractor. It was a mailbox service providing business addresses. Upton stared at the directory for several seconds, then returned to his truck. Still no conclusions. Still no accusations. Only observations. Observations were safer. Observations didn't lie. That evening, he returned to work. The campus looked normal. Employees moved through hallways. Researchers reviewed data. Executives attended meetings. Donors toured facilities. Everything continued exactly as before. Fraud, if it existed, rarely announced itself. It preferred routine. Routine allowed people to stop paying attention. At 11:08 p.m., Upton logged into the facility's archive again. This time he wasn't looking for invoices. He wanted approvals. Someone had authorized the payments. Someone had signed the documents. Someone had moved the money. The first file opened. Department approval, operations approval, financial authorization. Nothing surprising. Then he reached the final page. Electronic signature. His eyes narrowed slightly. He opened another invoice. Same result. Then another, and another. The same signature appeared repeatedly. Not Preston Whitmore, not the CFO, not a facilities manager. Vanessa Diaz. The screen remained motionless. So did Upton, for nearly 30 seconds. Not because he was shocked. Shock implied uncertainty. This felt different, like another puzzle piece quietly sliding into place. Vanessa worked in donor relations. Her role occasionally involved funding allocations tied to special projects. Her approval authority wasn't unlimited, but it existed. Enough to create opportunities, enough to create questions. The problem was not merely that her signature appeared. The problem was how often it appeared, and how consistently those approvals connected to Keller Infrastructure Solutions. Outside the office, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Someone passed. A door closed. The ordinary sounds of another work night. Inside, Upton opened a blank folder. He named it simply Reference. Nothing dramatic, nothing suspicious. Then he began saving copies, invoices, approval records, vendor registrations, payment histories, one file at a time. Carefully, methodically, without emotion. By midnight, the folder contained 23 documents. By 12:37 a.m., it contained 31. The investigation had not begun, not officially, not even in Upton's mind. But for the first time, the issue was no longer about a donor gala, or a wealthy board member, or a collapsing marriage. Now there was paperwork, and paperwork had a way of leading somewhere. The question was where. At 12:43 a.m., another document loaded onto his screen. A transfer authorization, a larger amount than any he had seen so far. Upton leaned forward, then read the number twice, because the first time didn't seem possible, and suddenly the problem was much bigger than a fake repair invoice. The transfer authorization was for $412,870. Not $4,000, not $40,000, $412,870. The money had been categorized as a specialized infrastructure acquisition connected to future laboratory expansion. The wording sounded legitimate. Everything about the document looked legitimate. That was the problem. Fraud rarely looked suspicious at first glance. If it did, nobody would approve it. Upton stared at the screen for nearly a minute. Then he closed the file. Not because he was finished, because he had seen enough for one night. People imagined investigations were driven by excitement. In reality, experience taught the opposite. The moment something became emotional, mistakes followed. He needed distance. Distance produced clarity. And clarity was becoming increasingly important. The next morning he returned home shortly after 7. Sunlight spilled through the kitchen windows. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that no longer felt temporary. Vanessa had been gone nearly a week, long enough for reality to settle in, long enough for routines to change. The empty side of the closet, the missing cosmetics in the bathroom, the absence of shoes near the front door. Every room contained small reminders. None of them hurt the way they had initially. Pain was strange. It arrived like a storm, then gradually transformed into weather, always present, less dramatic, more manageable. Upton poured coffee and sat at the kitchen island. His laptop remained closed. The transfer authorization remained in his mind. So did Vanessa's signature. So did Preston Whitmore. Pieces. Only pieces. No conclusions. Not yet. His phone buzzed. Vanessa. The screen illuminated. He watched it ring, then stop. A minute later, a text arrived. Need to stop by tomorrow. Still have some things at the house. No greeting, no explanation, no apology, just information. Upton stared at the message, then typed a response. Okay, that was all. Nothing else needed to be said. The following evening, rain clouds gathered over Raleigh. By 6 o'clock, the sky had darkened. At 6:34 p.m., a black Mercedes SUV pulled into the driveway. Upton watched from the kitchen window. Not surprised, not curious, simply observing. Vanessa stepped out carrying an expensive leather handbag, the same one she had taken when she left. She walked toward the house without hesitation, like someone returning to a place she still partly owned. Technically, she did. For now. The front door opened. Vanessa entered. The scent of expensive perfume followed her. For a moment she looked around the kitchen, perhaps noticing what hadn't changed. The coffee machine, the dining table, the framed photographs. The house remained familiar. Only the marriage had become unfamiliar. Hi. Hi. She set her keys on the counter. Neither moved closer. Neither attempted affection. The distance between them felt larger than the room. Vanessa folded her arms. You look tired. Upton shrugged. Work. She nodded. For several seconds, silence filled the kitchen. Then she walked toward the stairs. I'll grab my things. Okay. Again. Nothing more. As she disappeared upstairs, Upton returned to making coffee. The machine hissed softly. Water dripped. Rain tapped against the windows. Normal sounds. Steady sounds. 15 minutes later, Vanessa returned carrying 2 boxes. One contained clothing. The other contained personal items. Books, cosmetics, photographs, the leftovers of a shared life. She placed both boxes near the door, then looked at him, waiting. Upton recognized the expression immediately. She wanted something, not reconciliation, not forgiveness. Something else. Reaction. Conflict. Emotion. Proof. For years, Vanessa had interpreted calmness as passivity, silence as weakness, restraint as fear, and now she wanted confirmation. You know, she said most husbands would have fought by now. Upton poured coffee into a mug. Maybe. Her eyes narrowed. Maybe. He sat at the table. People handle things differently. A brief laugh escaped her, sharp, humorless. No, she shook her head. People who care fight. There it was. Not sadness, not grief. Challenge. The conversation wasn't about understanding. It was about judgment. Vanessa moved closer. I leave after 11 years and you barely react. Upton looked at her, steady, patient. You already made your decision. That's not the point. Then what's the point? The question lingered. Vanessa appeared irritated that he had asked it, as though the answer should have been obvious. You should have tried to stop me. He considered that, then nodded slightly. You wanted me to convince you to stay. Yes. The honesty surprised even her. For a moment, the room became very quiet. Rain continued outside. Traffic passed somewhere beyond the neighborhood. Then Upton asked a question. Only one. The same question that had been sitting quietly in the back of his mind. Waiting. Did you leave because you love Preston? Vanessa froze, just briefly, then recovered. What does that matter, Because I asked. Another pause. She looked away first. Not him. Interesting. Then she answered, I left because I'm tired of standing still. Not an answer, not really. Upton noticed. So did Vanessa. The tension in the room shifted. Neither spoke. Finally, Upton asked the second half, the part that mattered. Or did you leave because he looks like the future you wanted? Vanessa's expression hardened immediately. There it was. The reaction. Not outrage, recognition. A nerve touched directly. That's unfair. Is it? You wouldn't understand. The answer came too quickly, too defensively, too personally. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Vanessa laughed again, this time louder. You know what your problem is, Upton waited. You've always been comfortable being ordinary. The words landed exactly where she intended. Years ago, they might have worked. Years ago, they might have started an argument. Not now. Not anymore. Upton simply listened. Vanessa continued. You never wanted more. I wanted enough? That's the difference. No. He looked directly at her. That's the disagreement. For the first time she seemed uncertain, only briefly. Then the uncertainty disappeared, replaced by frustration. Because she wasn't getting what she wanted. No shouting, no pleading, no jealousy, no desperate attempt to save the marriage. Nothing. and that infuriated her more than anger would have. Finally, she grabbed her keys. "One day, you'll regret this." Upton remained seated. She stepped toward the door. "You'll regret not fighting harder for me." The sentence hung in the air. Heavy. Final. Intended to wound. Intended to remain. Vanessa opened the door. Rainy evening air rushed inside. Then she left. The door closed. The sound echoed through the house. Silence followed. Long silence. Real silence. The kind that arrives after something ends permanently. Upton sat motionless for several minutes. Not because he was devastated, not because he felt relieved, because he was thinking. Carefully. Methodically. About everything. The marriage. The lies. The invoices. The signatures. The transfer authorizations. The donor. The future. Eventually he stood, walked upstairs, entered the bedroom, opened the nightstand. Inside lay his wedding ring. He picked it up, turned it slowly between his fingers. 11 years. Reduced to a circle of gold. Then he walked downstairs, opened a desk drawer, and placed the ring beside a small black flash drive. The flash drive contained 31 documents: invoices, approvals, vendor records, transfer histories, evidence. For several seconds he looked at both objects. One represented the life that had ended, the other represented something that had only just begun. Outside, thunder rolled across Raleigh. Inside, Upton closed the drawer, and for the first time since Vanessa left, he made a decision. Not about the marriage. That decision had already been made. This was about the documents. Because if the numbers were telling the truth, someone had stolen far more than a husband. And Upton intended to find out exactly who. The first thing Upton did was buy a notebook. Not because he needed one. Because physical records forced discipline. Digital files could multiply endlessly. A notebook required choices. Every entry mattered. Every page carried weight. On Saturday morning, he drove to a Staples on Wake Forest Road and purchased a black hardcover notebook for $14.99. Nothing special, no labels, no markings. By noon, the first page contained only 3 words: facts before conclusions. Then he began. Over the next 4 days, Upton built a routine. Work, sleep, research, repeat. Nothing dramatic. No late-night stakeouts, no hidden cameras, no confrontations, just records. Thousands of records. The St. Bartholomew campus generated enormous amounts of data every day. Badge swipes, door access logs, maintenance requests, vendor check-ins, security footage archives, equipment delivery records, network timestamps. Most employees viewed those systems as background noise. Upton saw something different. Patterns. Patterns always existed. The challenge was finding them. At 2:11 a.m. on Monday, he compared contractor invoices against security entry logs. The process was tedious. Mind-numbingly tedious. Which was exactly why fraud often survived. Most people quit before reaching the interesting part. Upton never had. By sunrise, he had identified another discrepancy. Keller Infrastructure Solutions had billed for overnight work on 3 separate occasions. According to security records, no one from Keller Infrastructure Solutions had entered campus on those nights. Not one employee, not one vehicle, not one badge scan, nothing. The contractor supposedly performed more than $260,000 worth of services while never appearing on campus. Interesting. Very interesting. But still not enough. He needed verification. Independent verification. Which meant contacting someone he hadn't spoken to in nearly 6 years. Claire Bennett. The name remained in his phone. He had never deleted it. Back when Upton worked corporate investigations, Claire had been one of the best compliance analysts in the Southeast. Relentless. precise, impossible to intimidate. They had investigated 3 major fraud cases together before Upton left the industry. Now she worked in Charlotte as a senior compliance investigator for a healthcare network. At 9:14 a.m., he sent a text. Got a question. Need another set of eyes. The response arrived 4 minutes later. You only text when something is wrong. Coffee or prison? Upton almost smiled. Some people never changed. Coffee? Probably. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Tomorrow afternoon, Charlotte, he replied. Yes. The meeting took place at a small coffee shop 2 blocks from Claire's office. Tuesday, 2 p.m. Rain clouds covered most of the city. Claire arrived carrying a laptop bag and an expression suggesting she was already skeptical. She sat down, studied him, then leaned back. You look terrible. Good to see you too. I'm serious. I've had a busy week. Divorce. The question landed directly. Claire had always been annoyingly perceptive. Upton nodded. How bad? Bad enough. Sorry. The sincerity lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then Claire shifted gears. What did you find? Not what happened. Not how are you. Not tell me about the marriage. What did you find? That was why Upton trusted her. He opened the folder. Printed records, invoices, vendor registrations, payment approvals, access logs. Claire reviewed everything without interruption. 5 minutes, 10, 15. Occasionally she highlighted something. Occasionally she wrote notes. Mostly she remained silent. By the 20-minute mark, her expression had changed. The casual curiosity disappeared, replaced by concentration. At minute 31, she closed the folder. Okay. That wasn't a casual okay. Upton recognized the tone. Thoughts? Claire folded her arms. My first thought is that you're too close to this. Meaning your wife is involved. The words hung between them. Neither ignored them. Neither softened them. Claire continued. You need to separate 2 different things. Upton waited. Marriage, she pointed toward the folder. Evidence. Then she pointed at him. If those get mixed together, everything becomes useless. He nodded slowly, because she was right. Pain distorted judgment. Resentment distorted judgment. Betrayal distorted judgment. Facts did not. Claire leaned forward. Do you want revenge? No. The answer came immediately. Because it was true. Claire studied him carefully, apparently satisfied. Good. Then she tapped the invoices. Because these don't care about revenge. What do they care about on verification? She opened her laptop. For the next hour, they reviewed records together. Dates, times, vendor registrations, transaction histories, every inconsistency, every anomaly, every unexplained connection. Then Claire found something. A detail so small most people would have missed it. The approval sequence. Several payment authorizations followed nearly identical timing patterns. Same day, same review intervals, same processing windows. Too consistent. Human behavior rarely produced perfect consistency. Automation did, or coordination. Neither explanation felt comforting. Claire highlighted several entries. Look here. Upton leaned closer. She pointed to one transfer, then another, then a third. Different amounts, different months, same routing path. His eyes narrowed. The money wasn't merely leaving designated project accounts. It was moving through the same intermediate authorization channel. Again, and again, and again. Claire sat back. That's not random. No. It almost looks like someone built a system. The sentence lingered because it matched what Upton had been sensing. This wasn't opportunistic theft. It wasn't sloppy. It wasn't impulsive. Someone had designed this, carefully, patiently, professionally. The realization changed everything. Small frauds happened every day. Systems took planning. Systems took cooperation. Systems required trust between participants, which raised an uncomfortable question. How many people were involved? The meeting ended shortly before 5. Outside, Charlotte traffic crawled through wet streets. Claire walked him toward his truck. Before leaving, she stopped. One final piece of advice, the kind she had given countless times during investigations years earlier. Facts first. Upton nodded. Emotions later. She smiled slightly. Good. You remember. Then she left. The drive back to Raleigh took nearly 3 hours because of weather. Darkness settled across Interstate 85. Headlights stretched endlessly ahead. Windshield wipers moved rhythmically. Inside the truck, Upton replayed the conversation. Not the marriage. The evidence. The structure. The patterns. By the time he reached home, a new perspective had formed. The documents weren't isolated incidents. They were components. Pieces of something larger. At 11:47 p.m., he sat at his kitchen table. Laptop open. Notebook beside him. Coffee cooling nearby. One screen displayed financial records. Another displayed vendor histories. The transfer authorization for $412,870 remained visible. He began tracing it. One step, then another, then another. 40 minutes passed. Then 50. At 12:39 a.m., something finally connected. A routing code. A vendor payment sequence. An equipment acquisition entry. 3 separate records suddenly aligned. His pulse increased slightly. Not dramatically. Just enough. Enough to know he had found something important. The transfer wasn't simply inflated, it wasn't merely suspicious. The money had been redirected, intentionally, through a false equipment purchase. More than $400,000. Gone. Moved somewhere it was never supposed to go. Upton stared at the screen. The evidence sat directly in front of him, clearer than anything he had found so far. Outside, thunder rolled across Raleigh. Inside, the notebook remained open. He turned to a fresh page, then wrote a new name at the top. Preston Whitmore. And beneath it, for the first time, he drew a line connecting the donor, the vendor, and the missing money. 3 weeks after Vanessa moved out, people stopped pretending. Not everyone, but enough. Rumors had circulated quietly at first, the way rumors always do. A conversation near the elevators, a comment after a meeting, a glance exchanged in a hallway. Then came photographs. Not scandalous photographs, nothing dramatic, just public appearances, fundraisers, charity luncheons, a Chamber of Commerce event in Durham, a donor reception at a private golf club. In every photograph, Preston Whitmore stood beside Vanessa, smiling, comfortable, visible, no longer hiding. The foundation never acknowledged the relationship. It didn't have to. Everyone could see it. One Thursday evening, Upton entered Building B shortly before midnight. The lobby television displayed a local business segment. A reporter stood in front of a new commercial development. Preston Whitmore appeared on screen. Vanessa stood nearby. The interview lasted less than a minute. Still, several employees watched. One of the younger security guards noticed Upton, immediately uncomfortable. The man changed channels. Too late. Upton had already seen it. He simply continued walking. No reaction, no expression, just movement. Yet the guard remained embarrassed. People often became uncomfortable when someone refused to perform expected emotions. By now, many employees expected anger, humiliation, bitterness, something. Instead, they got silence, and silence made people nervous. At 1:03 a.m., Upton found himself repairing an access panel near the executive offices. The hallway was empty. Most senior staff had gone home hours earlier. The work took only 15 minutes. As he packed his tools, footsteps approached from behind. Expensive shoes. Measured pace. Not hurried, not uncertain. Upton already knew who it was before turning around. Preston Whitmore. Alone. The board member carried no jacket, despite the cold weather outside. Confidence often functioned as insulation. Working late? The question sounded casual, friendly, almost pleasant. Upton closed the panel. Looks that way. Preston smiled. For several seconds, neither spoke. The hallway remained silent except for distant ventilation systems. Finally, Preston placed his hands in his pockets. I wanted to say something. Interesting. Most powerful men preferred speaking when witnesses existed. Not Preston. Not tonight. Upton waited. Vanessa told me you're having a difficult time. There it was. Not concern. Positioning. A subtle declaration. Preston continued. Divorce can make people do irrational things. Upton watched him carefully. Years earlier, during investigations, he had learned an important lesson. Most threats did not sound threatening. The smartest ones never did. That's true. Preston nodded. I'm glad you understand. Another pause. Another measured smile. Then the board member stepped closer. Only slightly. I'd hate to see anyone make accusations they couldn't support. The sentence drifted into the hallway, light, polite, perfectly composed. Yet, there it was. The first real warning. Not direct enough to quote. Not direct enough to report. Just direct enough to understand. Upton considered the statement, then asked a simple question. Accusations about what? For the first time, Preston hesitated. Only briefly, less than a second. But it happened. A small mistake. Enough. Then the smile returned. Exactly. The conversation ended shortly afterward. Preston walked away. Calm, controlled, confident. But something about the exchange bothered Upton. Not the warning itself. The timing. Because nobody had been accused of anything. Not publicly, not privately. Which meant Preston feared something that hadn't happened yet. And fear rarely appeared without a reason. The next afternoon, Vanessa arrived at the house. Again. This time without notice. Upton heard the garage door opening while sorting documents at the dining table. When she entered, she looked different. Not happier. Just altered. More polished. More expensive. The subtle transformation had accelerated since leaving. Designer handbag, luxury watch, new jewelry, small details. Details mattered. She carried herself differently, too, as though proximity to Preston's world had changed her center of gravity. Still here? Upton glanced up. I live here. She laughed. The joke hadn't been intended. Vanessa walked through the kitchen, examining things, opening cabinets, checking drawers, not searching, observing, like someone revisiting a former address. Eventually, she noticed the paperwork spread across the table. What's all this financial records? Her eyes lingered for a fraction too long, then moved away. Interesting. Very interesting. Upton noticed. Vanessa noticed him noticing. Neither commented. The moment passed, or appeared to. She moved toward the living room. I need a few more things. Go ahead. 20 minutes later, she returned, carrying another box. This one smaller. Old photographs, personal documents, a few books. She set it near the front door, then looked around. Silence settled between them. The kind of silence that used to feel comfortable. Now it felt unfamiliar. Finally, Vanessa spoke. "You know people talk." "I'm sure they do." "They think you're angry." Upton closed a folder. "Should I be?" She ignored the question. "They feel sorry for you." That statement sounded deliberate, carefully chosen, perhaps intended to provoke, perhaps intended to test. Either way, it failed. Upton simply nodded. People can feel however they want. The response frustrated her immediately. He could see it. Not because she said anything, because disappointment flashed across her face. Again, she wasn't getting the reaction she wanted. No confrontation, no jealousy, no wounded pride. Nothing. The absence irritated her. Eventually, she folded her arms. "You really don't care." Upton considered the statement, then answered honestly. "I care." Her expression shifted. For a second, she looked hopeful. Then he continued. "I just don't think caring changes facts." Hope vanished. The room grew quiet again. Vanessa looked away first, toward the hallway, toward the staircase, anywhere except directly at him. Then her gaze settled on a stack of forms beside the dining table. Property records, insurance paperwork, asset inventories, documents Rebecca Sloan had prepared for eventual divorce proceedings. Vanessa recognized them instantly. "What is that inventory?" "Inventory?" Upton nodded. "Marital assets." Her expression hardened. "Seriously, yes." The answer felt almost absurdly calm, which made it more effective. Vanessa stepped closer. "You've already moved on to paperwork?" "No." Upton slid one page toward her. "I moved on to reality." The sentence landed harder than he intended. Not cruel, not angry, just true. For several seconds she stared at the document, then at him, then back at the document. Finally, she laughed. But there was no humor in it, only disbelief. "You're proving my point?" "What point?" "You're exactly who I thought you were." She grabbed her purse, lifted the box, moved toward the door. Halfway there, something slipped from the side pocket. Neither noticed immediately. The item landed silently on the hardwood floor. Vanessa opened the door. Cold air entered. Without another word, she left. The door closed. Her vehicle started moments later, then disappeared down the street. The house became quiet again. Upton returned to organizing paperwork. 5 minutes later, he stood to refill his coffee. That was when he saw it. A plastic key card. Dark gray. Luxury branding embossed across the front. The Umstead Hotel and Spa, one of the most expensive hotels in North Carolina. Upton picked it up, turned it over. Room access information remained encoded. Expiration date. Checkout date. Previous weekend. Interesting. Very interesting. Not because of the hotel, not because of the implication, because Vanessa had told him she spent that weekend at a donor retreat in Wilmington, a completely different city. Upton stared at the card, then placed it beside the growing stack of documents. Not evidence. Not yet. Just another fact. Another detail. Another piece. Outside evening settled over Raleigh. Inside, the key card rested on the table. And for the first time, Upton began wondering whether Vanessa knew how deeply she had become connected to whatever Preston Whitmore was hiding. The safe deposit box had not been opened in almost 7 years. Upton knew that because the date was stamped on the bank access record. October 14th. 7 years earlier. Different life. Different career. Different man. The box sat inside First Carolina Bank's downtown Raleigh branch, 3 floors above Fayetteville Street. Most people walking past the building every day would never notice it. Just another bank. Just another vault. Just another metal box. For Upton, it was something else. a sealed chapter, one he had deliberately avoided reopening. Until now. The key remained where he had always left it, inside a small envelope taped beneath a shelf in his garage workshop. Simple, unremarkable, secure. On a gray Tuesday morning, he parked outside the bank shortly after opening. The streets were still wet from overnight rain. Traffic moved slowly through downtown. People hurried toward office buildings carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Normal life. Ordinary life. The kind of life Upton had spent years trying to return to. Inside the bank, a manager escorted him toward the vault area. The process took only a few minutes. Identification, verification, signature. Then the metal box slid onto a private viewing table. The manager left. The room became silent. Upton stared at the box, not opening it immediately, just looking. Memory worked strangely. Certain objects carried weight disproportionate to their size. This box contained paper, nothing more. Yet his chest felt heavier than it had in weeks. Eventually, he inserted the key, turned it, opened the lid. Inside sat several folders. Old investigation notes, professional certifications, case summaries, court records, performance reviews, the remnants of a career he rarely discussed. One photograph rested near the top. Upton picked it up. 5 people stood in front of a federal office building, smiling, confident, ambitious. Claire Bennett stood on the left. Upton stood in the center. Back then he wore tailored suits, carried executive credentials, flew across the country investigating financial misconduct. Companies hired him when millions of dollars disappeared. Hospitals, insurance firms, corporate boards, government contractors. His job had been simple: follow records, find truth, write reports. The work paid well. Very well. It also consumed everything: travel, stress, deadlines, pressure. Months spent inside conference rooms reviewing transactions that most people could never understand. Over time, success became exhaustion. Exhaustion became isolation. Isolation became something worse. Then came the Mercer Healthcare investigation, the largest case of his career, $82 million, hundreds of falsified transactions, national attention, political consequences, months of work. In the end, Upton proved the fraud existed. He also learned something valuable. Truth and victory were not always the same thing. The executives responsible escaped criminal charges. Several lower-level employees took the blame. Reporters simplified complex facts. Lawyers distorted timelines. The public moved on, the system worked. Mostly, but not perfectly. When the investigation ended, Upton no longer recognized his own life. His father died 3 months later. A heart attack. Unexpected. Final. Everything changed after that. The travel stopped. The ambition disappeared. The need to win vanished. Upton resigned, accepted a facilities position, took a dramatic pay cut, and spent years rebuilding something simpler. Something quieter. Most people assumed he had settled. Only Upton understood the difference between settling and choosing. He closed the folder, then opened another. Reference materials, fraud methodologies, compliance procedures, vendor verification processes. The information remained useful, more useful than ever. By the time he left the bank, 2 folders sat inside his truck. The rest remained in storage. Some chapters deserved to stay closed. Others needed revisiting. Around noon, he drove to Rebecca Sloan's office. The attorney occupied the 8th floor of a professional building overlooking North Hills. Glass walls, modern furniture, orderly reception area. Nothing flashy. Everything efficient. Rebecca greeted him personally. 51 years old. Sharp eyes, measured voice, the type of attorney who seemed to notice details before clients mentioned them. She led him into a conference room, a legal pad already rested on the table. "You look more prepared than most people facing divorce." Upton sat down. "Preparation helps." "It usually does." Rebecca opened a file. Their divorce proceedings remained in early stages. Asset disclosures, property inventories, financial documentation, routine matters. At least on the surface. For nearly an hour, they reviewed accounts, debts, insurance policies, and property records. The process remained straightforward, no arguments, no surprises. Until Rebecca paused. Her pen stopped moving. She reread a document, then another. Interesting. Very interesting. Upton noticed immediately. "What is it?" Rebecca turned the page toward him. A reimbursement authorization. One he had already seen among the foundation records. Vanessa's signature appeared at the bottom. The amount itself wasn't extraordinary, just under $30,000. The issue was timing. Rebecca tapped the date. "Look here." Upton examined it, then understood. The reimbursement had occurred during a period when the associated project technically did not exist. Approval before authorization. Money before project creation. Backwards. Rebecca folded her arms. "That's unusual." "How unusual for normal accounting?" She thought about it. "Very." The answer remained careful, professional, but clear. Rebecca wasn't investigating fraud. That wasn't her role. Still, experience allowed her to recognize irregularities, and this qualified. She looked directly at him. "Tell me something." Upton waited. "Are these documents related to your marriage?" The question carried more weight than it appeared. He considered it carefully, then answered truthfully. "I don't know yet." Rebecca studied him, apparently deciding whether she believed that. Eventually she nodded. "Fair answer." The meeting continued. Property, assets, procedures, deadlines. Yet the reimbursement document remained in both their minds. When the session ended, Rebecca gathered the paperwork, then stopped. One final observation, the kind attorneys make after years of watching people destroy themselves. Don't chase two battles at once. Upton understood immediately. Divorce, investigation, separate issues, separate decisions, separate consequences. He appreciated the advice because Claire had essentially said the same thing. Facts first, emotions later. Outside afternoon sunlight reflected off downtown windows. Upton walked toward his truck, thinking. The pattern continued growing. Every answer produced two more questions. Every document connected to another. Every trail led somewhere. And increasingly, many of those trails passed through Vanessa. The realization bothered him more than he expected. Not because she had left. That wound was already healing. Because he genuinely did not know how much she understood. Was she participating? Being manipulated? Ignoring warning signs? Helping someone? Helping herself? He didn't know, and assumptions were dangerous. By evening, he returned home. The house remained quiet, predictable, orderly, a welcome contrast to everything else. After dinner, he reviewed records until nearly midnight. Vendor histories, transfer logs, approval chains, the usual routine. Then he found something. A single expense authorization buried among dozens of ordinary transactions. Small enough to escape attention. Large enough to matter. The document carried a familiar signature. Vanessa's. Again. But this time another signature appeared beside it. Not Preston Whitmore. Not the CFO. Someone else. A name Upton had never noticed before. Daniel Price, Chief Financial Officer. For several seconds he stared at the screen, then wrote the name in his notebook. One more connection, one more piece, one more reason to keep digging. And for the first time, Upton began wondering whether Preston Whitmore was merely the visible face of a much larger problem. The annual St. Bartholomew Foundation Gala attracted the kind of people who preferred their names on buildings: donors, developers, hospital executives, political figures, university trustees, people who never introduced themselves using job titles because everyone in the room already knew who they were. For months, preparation for the event had consumed the foundation. Banners were printed, sponsorship packages finalized, media invitations distributed. The gala wasn't merely a fundraiser, it was a public performance, an opportunity to display influence. And this year, Preston Whitmore intended to dominate the stage. The event took place at the Raleigh Convention Center. Nearly 700 guests attended. Television crews occupied designated media areas. Photographers moved constantly between tables. Corporate logos filled enormous digital displays. Everything looked polished. Everything looked successful. Exactly as intended. Upton arrived shortly before noon, not as a guest, as support staff. Large events always required facilities personnel, power systems, backup systems, emergency access coordination, technical support. He spent most of the afternoon moving between equipment rooms and monitoring stations. Ordinary work, the kind nobody noticed unless something failed, which suited him perfectly. At 4:20 p.m., he passed through the main ballroom during final preparations. Workers adjusted lighting rigs. Audio technicians conducted sound checks. Event coordinators rushed between tables. Near the stage stood Vanessa and Preston, together, talking with reporters, smiling for photographs, moving effortlessly through the crowd. Several employees nearby watched them. One whispered something. Another laughed quietly. The reactions were predictable. By now everyone knew. No official announcement existed. None was necessary. The relationship had become public months ago. Upton continued walking. He barely glanced in their direction. The less attention he drew, the better. Around 6 o'clock, guests began arriving. The ballroom transformed. Conversations filled the space, champagne flowed. Music drifted through the room. The event officially began at 7. From a monitoring station behind the main stage, Upton watched the opening presentations on several technical screens. Everything functioned normally, at least initially. Research achievements, funding milestones, future expansion plans, the usual sequence. Then came Preston's presentation. The room changed immediately. Attention sharpened. People leaned forward. Donors recognized opportunities when they saw them. Preston stepped onto the stage to enthusiastic applause. Tall, confident, perfectly composed. The giant projection screens displayed architectural renderings behind him. Future laboratories, research centers, medical innovation facilities. The audience loved it. Preston spoke smoothly. Every sentence rehearsed, every pause calculated. He announced a major donation initiative. $20 million. The ballroom erupted. Applause, standing ovations, excitement. Several cameras turned toward Vanessa. She stood near the front tables, smiling, proud, visible, exactly where she wanted to be. For several minutes, everything proceeded flawlessly. Then, something happened. A small technical issue. The sort of problem most people would never notice. One of the presentation laptops briefly disconnected from the projection system. Only for a moment. Perhaps 3 seconds. 4 at most. The primary presentation vanished. A desktop screen appeared instead. The audience barely reacted. Most people assumed it was a routine glitch. The technicians corrected it almost immediately. The presentation resumed. The event continued. The audience forgot. Upton didn't. Because during those few seconds he had seen something. Not an image, not a message. A file directory. Several folders. One folder name in particular. KIS-infrastructure. His eyes narrowed instantly. KIS. Keller Infrastructure Solutions. The same vendor appearing throughout the questionable records. The same vendor connected to inflated invoices. The same vendor linked to suspicious transfers. The folder disappeared almost immediately. Yet, that was enough. More than enough. Because it should not have existed on Preston Whitmore's presentation laptop. Not under any normal circumstances. The realization settled heavily inside him. The connection wasn't theoretical anymore. It wasn't circumstantial. It wasn't abstract. Now there was direct overlap. The donor, the vendor, the financial records, the same ecosystem, the same network, the same names appearing repeatedly. At 7:46 p.m. the presentation ended. The ballroom erupted into another round of applause. Preston smiled. Vanessa smiled. The audience celebrated. Meanwhile, Upton quietly walked toward the backstage technical area. He wasn't rushing. Rushing attracted attention. Instead, he moved normally, calmly, patiently, the way he always did. Several technicians worked near equipment racks. Others monitored projection systems. Nobody paid much attention to him. Facilities personnel were invisible by design. One technician recognized him. "Everything good." "So far." The technician nodded, then returned to work. Upton examined the equipment layout. Not touching anything. Simply observing. The presentation laptop had already been disconnected. Packed away. Removed. Interesting. Very efficient. Almost too efficient. Still not proof. But the timing felt notable. He continued working his assigned responsibilities for the next 2 hours. Monitoring access points. Checking equipment rooms. Handling minor issues. Yet his thoughts repeatedly returned to the laptop. The folder. The vendor. The overlap. At approximately 9:30 p.m., the gala entered its social phase. Guests circulated, conversations expanded, business cards exchanged hands, future deals quietly formed. From a distance, Upton observed the room, not individuals, patterns, clusters, relationships, power structures. Years earlier, investigations had trained him to see environments differently. Most people focused on personalities. Investigators focused on connections. And tonight, one connection stood above all others. Preston, Vanessa, Daniel Price, repeatedly appearing within the same circles, repeatedly interacting, repeatedly connected to records already raising concerns. At 10:07 p.m., Upton stepped into a service corridor near the ballroom. The hallway remained mostly empty. Dim lighting, concrete walls, equipment carts, a temporary escape from the noise. He had barely taken 10 steps when another voice spoke behind him. "Interesting presentation." Upton turned. Preston Whitmore. Again. Alone. Again. The coincidence felt increasingly unlikely. Preston approached casually. No tension visible. No urgency, only confidence, the confidence of a man accustomed to controlling situations. "It went well." "It seemed to." Preston smiled, then studied him carefully. "Not long. Just enough." "You spend a lot of time observing things." The statement wasn't a question. Upton noticed that immediately. "I fix things." "Sometimes." Preston nodded. "Other times you observe." Silence followed. The corridor suddenly felt narrower, not threatening, just focused. Then Preston delivered the real message. "Observation can be dangerous." There it was. Another warning, more direct than the first. Still vague enough to deny later, still polished enough to sound harmless, yet unmistakable. Upton remained calm. Depends what you're observing. For the first time, Preston's smile faded slightly. Not completely, just enough. The two men looked at each other, neither speaking, neither blinking. A moment stretched, then ended. Eventually, Preston straightened his jacket. "Enjoy the rest of your evening." He turned, walked away, and disappeared around the corner. Upton remained where he was, thinking, because the conversation confirmed something important. Preston knew, not everything, but enough. Enough to recognize risk, enough to monitor him, enough to worry. And powerful people only worried when something valuable was threatened. Hours later, the gala finally concluded. Guests departed. Equipment shutdown began. Staff cleaned the ballroom. The building slowly emptied. Near midnight, Upton finished his final inspection and headed toward the parking structure. The night air felt cooler than expected. Rain threatened again. As he unlocked his truck, his phone buzzed. A new email notification. Sender unknown. No subject line, no message, only one attachment. A PDF, 42 pages. Upton stared at the screen, then at the attachment. No explanation, no identity, no context. Just 42 pages sent anonymously less than an hour after Preston Whitmore's second warning. For several seconds, he remained motionless. Then he opened the file, and immediately understood why someone wanted him to see it. The PDF contained 42 pages. Upton did not open it in the parking garage. That would have been a mistake. Years earlier, during investigations, he had learned that information meant nothing without context, and context required patience. So he drove home, parked the truck, made coffee, sat at the dining room table, then opened the file. The first page immediately caught his attention. Vendor Reconciliation Report. The document appeared internal. Very internal. Not something intended for public distribution. Not something a donor should possess. Not something a facilities technician was ever supposed to see. Page after page contained financial summaries, transaction records, approval histories, project codes, and comments. The comments mattered most, because comments revealed thinking. Thinking revealed intent. Several sections referenced concerns about irregular payment structures. Others questioned contractor verification procedures. A few contained direct requests for audits. Every request had been denied, or delayed, or reassigned. Interesting? Very interesting. By page 23, a name appeared repeatedly. Daniel Price, Chief Financial Officer. The same name Upton had discovered only days earlier. The pattern continued. Daniel approved exceptions. Daniel authorized overrides. Daniel signed compliance waivers. Daniel redirected inquiries. Not proof, but increasingly difficult to ignore. At page 38, another name appeared. Harold Mercer, Director of Security. That surprised him. Security should not have been involved in financial review procedures. Yet, there it was. Several entries referenced restricted access investigations overseen by Mercer's department. Again, not proof, but another connection, another thread. By the time Upton reached the final page, the coffee had gone cold. The PDF ended with a short note. No signature, no identification, just one sentence. "You're looking in the right place." Then nothing. The anonymous sender had vanished. The message bothered him, not because it existed, because it implied observation. Someone knew he was investigating. Someone knew enough to help. Or manipulate. Possibly both. The distinction mattered. At 3:14 a.m. Upton saved a copy of the file. Then a second backup. then a third. Redundancy was a habit. Habits kept people safe, especially when situations became complicated. The following week began normally, at least on the surface. The campus looked unchanged. Employees attended meetings, researchers conducted studies, executives scheduled donor visits. The foundation continued operating. Meanwhile, beneath that routine, pressure began building. Subtle pressure. The dangerous kind. On Monday afternoon, Upton received an email from Human Resources. Effective immediately, his schedule had been adjusted. New shift assignments, different building responsibilities, different coverage zones. The change made little sense. He had spent years working the same operational areas. Now he was being reassigned to lower priority locations. No explanation accompanied the decision. Interesting. Not alarming. Just interesting. On Tuesday, another issue appeared. A maintenance request filed under his employee identification number. The problem was that Upton had never submitted it. Someone had, but not him. The request was eventually canceled, no damage done. Still, another oddity. On Wednesday, access permissions changed. Several records previously available through his role suddenly required additional authorization. Not impossible to access, just more difficult. A pattern was emerging. Small inconveniences, small obstacles, small restrictions, nothing dramatic enough to challenge directly. Yet, noticeable, very noticeable. By Thursday evening, Upton understood. Someone wanted him distracted, not fired, not removed. Distracted. The realization actually reassured him. People only created obstacles when something mattered. Then Friday arrived, and everything escalated. At approximately 11:20 p.m., Harold Mercer appeared outside the maintenance office. The security director rarely visited that area, especially during night shifts. Harold knocked once, then entered. 57 years old, broad shoulders, former law enforcement, a man whose career had taught him how to project authority. "Got a minute?" Upton looked up from his workstation. "Sure." Harold closed the door. Never a good sign. Then he sat down. Also unusual. The conversation began casually. Weather, workload, staffing, normal topics, too normal. Eventually, Harold reached the real reason for the visit. "We have a situation." Upton waited. "Missing equipment." There it was. Harold slid a printed report across the desk. Several pieces of portable medical equipment had allegedly disappeared from temporary storage. The total value exceeded $40,000. Interesting. Very interesting. Upton reviewed the report. Dates, locations, inventory numbers. Then he noticed something. The equipment supposedly vanished from an area near his assigned work zone. Convenient. Almost impressively convenient. Harold watched carefully, studying reactions, expecting something. Perhaps surprise, perhaps panic. Instead, Upton simply continued reading. "Okay." Harold blinked. "Okay. What do you need from me?" The security director appeared mildly disappointed. "Maybe an explanation. For equipment, I didn't take silence. Brief, uncomfortable." Then Harold shifted position. "We're talking to everyone with access." Reasonable. On the surface, yet something felt wrong. Very wrong. Upton returned the report. "When was the equipment last verified?" Harold hesitated, then answered, "Tuesday." "Who verified it?" Another hesitation. Smaller this time. "Inventory staff." "Names." Harold did not immediately respond. Interesting. Extremely interesting. The conversation continued another 10 minutes. Nothing overtly hostile, nothing openly accusatory. yet the direction remained clear. Pressure, testing, observation. Eventually, Harold stood. "Let us know if you remember anything." Upton nodded. "Of course." The security director left. The office became quiet again. For approximately 23 minutes. Then another security officer appeared. This one younger, nervous, embarrassed. "Mr. Diaz." "Yeah, we need to inspect employee lockers." There it was, finally, the next step. Upton followed the officer toward the locker room. 3 additional security personnel waited inside. Along with Harold Mercer, the atmosphere felt staged, too organized, too prepared. Harold spoke first. "Routine inspection." Of course it was. Upton unlocked his locker, stepped aside. Security began searching. Several employees had gathered nearby, watching, whispering. The process lasted less than a minute. Then one officer stopped. His expression changed. A small hard case sat near the rear of the locker. The officer lifted it carefully, opened it. Inside rested 2 missing medical scanners, the same inventory numbers listed on Harold's report. The room became silent, completely silent. Several employees stared. One security officer looked genuinely shocked. Another looked nervous. Harold looked satisfied. Too satisfied. Upton noticed immediately. The scanners remained inside the case, untouched, neatly arranged, almost displayed. Interesting. Because people hiding stolen equipment rarely organized it so carefully. Harold folded his arms. "That's a problem." The statement hung in the room. Everyone waiting. Everyone watching. Waiting for panic. Waiting for excuses. Waiting for emotion. Instead, Upton reached into his pocket, removed his phone, and opened a photograph. Then another. Then another. Harold's expression changed immediately. Only slightly. But enough. 3 days earlier, Upton had photographed the locker interior while documenting unrelated maintenance equipment. The timestamp appeared clearly. The photographs showed the locker empty. Completely empty. No hard case. No scanners, nothing. He handed the phone to Harold. The security director examined the images. Silence deepened. One officer shifted uncomfortably. Another looked away. Then Upton asked a single question. The same type of question he used to ask during investigations. Simple, specific, difficult to evade. "What is the chain of custody number?" Nobody answered. Upton continued. "What police report number was assigned?" Still nothing. The room remained frozen. Then he asked one final question. "Who had access to the locker room between Tuesday and tonight?" This time Harold looked away first, only for a second. Yet that second told Upton everything he needed to know. The trap had failed, and whoever built it had underestimated one thing. Upton Diaz documented everything. The following Monday, Upton stopped collecting evidence, not because he was finished, because he had reached a different stage. There was a point in every investigation when gathering more information became less important than preserving what already existed. That point had arrived. His dining room table no longer looked like a dining room table. It looked like a case file. Folders. Timelines, transaction summaries, vendor records, approval chains, access logs, security reports, email metadata, photographs. Every document had been reviewed repeatedly, every date cross-referenced, every claim verified. Nothing relied on assumptions, nothing relied on rumors, nothing relied on Vanessa's affair. That distinction mattered. The marriage explained motive, the records established facts, and facts survived scrutiny. By Tuesday afternoon, Claire Bennett had reviewed the final package. The video call lasted nearly 2 hours. She sat in her Charlotte office with 3 monitors glowing behind her. Upton remained at home. The stack of documents rested beside his laptop. Claire scrolled through files one final time, occasionally stopping, occasionally zooming in, occasionally verifying timestamps. When she finally finished, she leaned back in her chair. For several seconds, she said nothing. That silence told Upton more than words could. "Well," Claire folded her arms, "I don't see any major weaknesses." Coming from Claire, that was nearly a standing ovation. "What do you see?" "A pattern." Upton waited. A very deliberate pattern. She tapped several highlighted sections. Fake vendors. Another section. Inflated invoices. Another. Approval chains routed through the same people. Another. Internal reviews repeatedly blocked. Then she pointed toward the anonymous PDF. And somebody inside the organization got nervous enough to leak information. The conclusion felt unavoidable now. Not certainty, but direction. The evidence wasn't random anymore. It formed structure. Structure formed narrative. Narrative attracted investigators. Claire closed the final file. "You're ready?" The words landed heavily. Ready. The next step carried consequences. Once information left his hands, events would begin moving beyond his control. Upton understood that. Claire understood it too. "Any second thoughts?" "No," she nodded. "Good." Then she delivered the warning. The same warning experienced investigators always gave. The truth doesn't care about fairness. Upton knew what she meant. People imagined evidence automatically produced justice. Reality was messier. Investigations damaged reputations, destroyed careers, created enemies. Facts mattered. Politics mattered too. He accepted that. Then he sent the package. At 4:17 p.m., 46 files. Structured summaries, supporting documentation, metadata verification, timeline analysis. Everything forwarded through appropriate reporting channels to the North Carolina Attorney General's Charitable Organizations Division. No accusations, no emotional statements, no conclusions, only facts. That was important, very important, because facts traveled further than opinions. The moment the submission completed, something unexpected happened. Upton felt calmer. Not victorious. Not relieved. Calmer. The burden of carrying everything alone had finally ended. Now the evidence belonged to the evidence. Nothing more, nothing less. The next major event arrived 3 days later. Divorce mediation. Rebecca Sloan's office. Friday morning, 9 a.m. The conference room overlooked downtown Raleigh. Large windows. Gray skies. Quiet atmosphere. Professional environment. Everything designed to reduce conflict. Unfortunately, people often brought conflict with them. Vanessa arrived first. Rebecca noticed immediately. The confidence, the posture, the certainty. Vanessa dressed carefully. Designer suit. Perfect makeup. Controlled expression. She looked like someone expecting a favorable outcome, not someone concerned about consequences. Across the room, Upton appeared exactly as usual. Button-down shirt, dark jacket. No theatrics, no visible resentment, just preparation. The contrast was impossible to miss. Mediation began routinely. Property division, accounts, assets, procedural discussions. Rebecca guided the conversation steadily. Professional. Efficient? Neutral. For nearly 40 minutes, everything remained civil. Then Vanessa lost patience. The shift happened gradually. A comment here, a remark there, small things. Eventually, she leaned back and looked directly at Upton. "I still don't understand you." The room became quiet. Rebecca glanced toward her notes, carefully choosing not to interfere. Vanessa continued. "Most people would have fought harder." There it was again, the sentence, the same belief, the same criticism. Months later, and it still lived inside her. Upton listened, said nothing. Vanessa shook her head. 11 years. Another pause. 11 years, and you just let it end. The observation might have sounded cruel to someone else. To Upton, it sounded revealing, because Vanessa still misunderstood something fundamental. She believed fighting meant refusing reality, demanding outcomes, controlling choices. Upton saw it differently. Rebecca remained silent, watching, observing, the way experienced attorneys often did. Eventually Upton spoke. His voice remained calm, measured. I didn't let it end. Vanessa frowned. Then what happened? You ended it. The sentence landed with surprising force, not because it was aggressive, because it was accurate. Facts carried weight, especially when nobody raised their voice. For several seconds, Vanessa stared at him, apparently expecting more. An argument, a defense, something. Instead, he returned to reviewing paperwork. The conversation died, but the atmosphere changed. Something subtle shifted. For the first time, uncertainty appeared in Vanessa's expression. Not much, just enough. Enough to matter. The mediation continued. Eventually, Rebecca reviewed asset inventories, property disclosures, financial obligations, routine matters. Then she opened a separate folder. Not part of the divorce file. A different folder. One she had brought intentionally. Rebecca did not reveal its contents. She simply placed it on the table. The action appeared small, ordinary. Yet Vanessa noticed immediately. So did Upton. The attorney rested one hand atop the folder. Nothing more. No dramatic statement. No accusation. Just presence. The symbolism was obvious. Documentation existed. Documentation mattered. The room became noticeably quieter. After another 20 minutes, the mediation ended for the day. No major disputes, no emotional scenes, no victories. Only progress. As Vanessa gathered her belongings, she paused, looking toward Upton one final time. You really think you're right about everything? The statement sounded tired now, less confident, less certain. Upton considered responding, then decided against it, because she was still asking the wrong question. This had never been about being right. It had always been about being accurate. There was a difference. Vanessa eventually left. The conference room door closed behind her. Rebecca waited several moments before speaking. Then she looked at the folder still resting on the table. She noticed. Upton nodded. Good. Rebecca opened the folder slightly, only enough for him to glimpse the top document. One page, one signature, one approval authorization. Vanessa's. Connected to one of the largest questionable transactions discovered so far. The attorney closed the folder again, quietly, deliberately. We're not using this unless necessary. I know, Rebecca nodded, because that was exactly the correct answer. Evidence wasn't ammunition. Evidence was responsibility. Outside the office windows, afternoon clouds drifted across downtown Raleigh. Traffic moved through the streets below. People hurried between meetings. Ordinary lives continued. Inside the conference room, the folder remained closed. But its existence changed everything. Because for the first time, Upton realized something important. The investigation was no longer approaching the people involved. It had already reached them. And sooner or later, someone was going to panic. 4 months changed everything. And almost nothing. That was the strange part. From the outside, Upton's life appeared remarkably similar. He still drove the same silver Tacoma, still worked night shifts, still packed his own lunches, still arrived early, still left quietly. Most mornings he stopped at the same diner near Falls of Noose Road. Same booth, same coffee, same waitress named Carol who called everyone on. The routine remained intact. Meanwhile, somewhere beyond that routine, an entire structure was beginning to collapse. The first signs appeared in the news. Not front-page headlines, not yet. Small articles, industry publications, regional business reports, short notices buried beneath larger stories, questions about donor fund management, questions about project expenditures, questions about compliance reviews. Nothing definitive, nothing explosive. Just questions. Questions had a way of multiplying, especially when investigators started asking them. One Monday morning, Upton sat alone in the diner scrolling through an article on his phone. The headline was modest. Regulatory review requested for major biomedical foundation projects. Most readers would have ignored it. Upton didn't, because he recognized several names. Daniel Price, St. Bartholomew Foundation, infrastructure spending, internal oversight concerns. The language remained cautious. Lawyers always preferred caution. Still, the direction was clear. The process had begun. 3 days later, another article appeared. Then another. Each one slightly larger. Each one slightly less careful. The foundation released public statements, generic statements, predictable statements. We are cooperating. We remain committed to transparency. We take compliance seriously. The usual language, the kind organizations used when they were worried. At work, employees noticed. Of course they did. People always noticed, especially when television trucks appeared. The first news van arrived on a Wednesday morning, then another, then 3 more. Reporters gathered outside the main entrance. Camera crews filmed arriving executives. Employees pretended not to stare, then stared anyway. Rumors spread through every department. Some exaggerated, some invented. A few accidentally landed close to the truth. Upton listened to none of them. Rumors contaminated thinking. Documents mattered. Evidence mattered. Everything else was noise. By the second week, the board announced an internal review, then an external review, then an independent review. The distinctions amused Upton. Organizations often created additional reviews when trying to appear proactive. The public usually interpreted activity as accountability. Not always correctly. One Thursday night, while replacing a damaged access panel in Building A, Upton overheard 2 administrators talking. They didn't realize he could hear them. Most people rarely noticed facilities staff. That blindness remained useful. "Have you seen Preston lately?" The first voice sounded nervous. The second answered immediately. "No, nobody has. He's avoiding everyone." Interesting. Very interesting. The conversation continued. Preston had missed meetings, canceled appearances, stopped attending events, ignored calls. Behavior completely inconsistent with the man who once treated visibility like oxygen. Upton returned to his work, but the information stayed with him. People became invisible for different reasons, sometimes by choice, sometimes by necessity, sometimes because visibility had become dangerous. At the end of the month, the first major announcement arrived. The Foundation Board issued a public statement. Preston Whitmore had resigned, effective immediately. The explanation cited personal reasons: health, family priorities, a desire to focus on private business matters. Nobody believed it. Not the employees, not the reporters, not the public. Certainly not Upton. Powerful men rarely abandoned influence voluntarily, not unless staying became more costly. The resignation dominated local news for 3 days. Then another development followed. Daniel Price disappeared from the Foundation website. No announcement, no explanation. His biography simply vanished. A week later, an interim CFO appeared. The replacement arrived before anyone admitted the previous executive was gone. That told its own story. Meanwhile, Vanessa remained visible. At first, she continued attending meetings, continued appearing in donor communications, continued presenting normality. Yet subtle changes emerged. Her name appeared less frequently. Her public appearances decreased. Internal directories changed. Projects shifted. Responsibilities narrowed. The process looked familiar to Upton. Organizations often isolated liabilities before removing them. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Claire called. Not texted. Called. That alone suggested significance. Upton answered immediately. "What's happening?" Claire skipped introductions. "Administrative leave." He leaned back. "Who?" "Vanessa." Silence filled the line, not because he was shocked, because he wasn't. The timing made sense. Claire continued. "The foundation isn't saying much." "What are they saying?" "Review process." He almost smiled. Of course. Review process, the corporate equivalent of a storm warning. Neither spoke for several seconds. Eventually Claire sighed. "They found more." "What kind of more?" "About the expensive kind." That answer told him enough. Large financial problems always attracted attention. Very large financial problems attracted investigators. The conversation ended shortly afterward. Neither speculated, neither guessed. Facts first. Always. The following week, local television stations camped permanently outside St. Bartholomew. The story had grown too large to ignore. Investigators, auditors, board meetings, resignations, questions. Every day introduced another development. Every day, another executive looked uncomfortable. Meanwhile, Upton kept working. One night he repaired a broken card reader. Another night he replaced emergency lighting. Then a damaged elevator sensor. Normal work. Necessary work. The contrast felt almost absurd. Entire careers were imploding around him. Yet the hallway lights still needed replacing. Reality rarely paused for scandal. One evening near midnight, he walked through a nearly empty administrative wing. The atmosphere had changed. People moved differently, spoke more quietly, looked over their shoulders. Uncertainty had settled across the campus. Fear often followed investigations. Not because everyone was guilty, because nobody knew where the investigation would stop. At 12:16 a.m., his phone vibrated. Unknown number. Upton stared at the screen. Ignored it. The call stopped, then returned 30 seconds later. Same number. He answered. "Hello." Silence. For a moment he heard only breathing, then a familiar voice. "Upton." Vanessa. The sound of her voice felt distant, not emotionally, literally, as if she were calling from somewhere large and empty. Perhaps a hotel room, perhaps an office, perhaps nowhere she wanted to be. Neither spoke immediately. Months had passed. Entire seasons. Entire lives. Finally, Vanessa broke the silence. "I didn't know who else to call." Outside, rain tapped softly against the building windows. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Upton remained standing in the empty corridor, listening, not interrupting, not rescuing, just listening. Vanessa exhaled slowly. The confidence that once defined her voice seemed diminished, not gone, just damaged. "We need to talk." The sentence hung in the air, heavy, unavoidable, expected. For months, Upton had known this call would eventually come. Not because he predicted every detail, because consequences always arrived. Eventually. The only question had been timing. Now, timing had answered itself. He looked through the corridor window toward the dark Raleigh skyline, then spoke, calmly. "What do you want to talk about?" And for the first time since walking away from their marriage, Vanessa had no immediate answer. For several seconds, neither spoke. The line remained open. The silence wasn't awkward. It was crowded. Crowded with months of unfinished conversations, months of assumptions, months of consequences. Somewhere on the other end of the call, Vanessa exhaled slowly. Upton heard traffic in the background, a car door closing, distant voices. She wasn't at home, whatever home meant now. Finally, she spoke. "Can we meet?" Upton looked down the empty hallway. The building around him felt unusually still. "I don't think that's necessary." The answer arrived gently. Not cold, not inviting, simply honest. Another pause followed, longer this time. When Vanessa spoke again, her voice sounded smaller than he remembered. Not weaker, smaller, as if certainty had finally begun abandoning her. Preston lied. There it was, the sentence, the beginning, the explanation she had been preparing. Perhaps for weeks, perhaps for months. Upton listened, nothing more. Vanessa continued. He lied about a lot of things. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Rain continued tapping against the windows. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary night. Strangely comforting. Because the conversation itself felt anything but ordinary. "Okay." That was all Upton said. Okay, no surprise, no outrage, no satisfaction. The response unsettled her immediately. He could hear it. People often expected emotional rewards when admitting mistakes. Sympathy, validation, rescue, something. Vanessa received none. Only space large enough for the truth to occupy. "He used me." The words emerged quickly, as though releasing pressure. "I didn't know everything." Again, Upton listened. Not because he automatically believed her, not because he automatically doubted her, because listening cost nothing. Assumptions cost a great deal. Vanessa continued speaking. The story emerged in fragments. Preston had promised opportunities, influence, professional advancement, connections, a future that always seemed one promotion away, one project away, one introduction away. At first, everything felt exciting, then confusing, then complicated, eventually frightening. Several times she stopped talking. Several times she started again. The pauses revealed more than the words. People often edited stories. They rarely edited silence. Finally, she asked the question, the one she had been approaching since the beginning. "Did you know?" Upton considered that carefully. "Know what?" "About Preston." The answer required precision. Precision mattered, especially now. "I knew something was wrong." "How long?" "Long enough." Vanessa laughed softly. The sound carried no humor, only regret. "I used to think you never noticed anything." That observation almost made Upton smile, because it revealed how differently they had experienced the same marriage. Vanessa had mistaken stillness for blindness. Many people did. The world rewarded noise. It often ignored observation. Eventually she asked another question, one more difficult. "Why didn't you stop me?" There it was again. The same theme, different wording, same belief. Upton walked toward a nearby window. Raleigh stretched beneath the night sky. Lights, roads, movement, life continuing, as it always did. Then he answered. "How?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. How was I supposed to stop you?" Silence. He continued. "You had already decided." More silence. "You wanted a different life." The rain intensified briefly, then softened again. Vanessa said nothing, because there wasn't much to say. Facts rarely required decoration. Finally, she spoke. "You should have fought harder." The sentence landed exactly where she intended. The same sentence, the same accusation, the same belief she had carried for months, maybe years. Upton leaned against the window frame, thinking, not reacting, thinking, because she deserved an honest answer, perhaps for the first time. When he finally spoke, his voice remained calm, steady, certain. "I thought about that." Nothing on the line, only listening. A lot. The word surprised her. He could tell immediately. Perhaps she had expected dismissal. Instead, she received truth. For months, Upton had considered that sentence, late at night, during long drives, over coffee, while repairing doors, while reviewing documents, while sitting alone in a house that no longer felt married. He had examined it from every angle. What if he had begged? What if he had argued? What if he had demanded? What if he had chased? What if he had competed? What if he had fought harder? The question had visited him countless times. Eventually, it stopped visiting, because he found the answer. "I really did think about it." Vanessa remained silent, listening carefully now. Then Upton continued. "And I realized something." The city lights reflected faintly against the glass. His own reflection stared back. Older, calmer, different. "If I had fought harder, I would have been fighting against reality." The silence that followed felt enormous, not uncomfortable, just unavoidable, because the statement touched something neither of them could escape. Reality. Reality that Vanessa had chosen Preston. Reality that she had walked away. Reality that she had wanted something different. Reality that no amount of effort could force another person to stay. Eventually, Vanessa spoke, very quietly. "I made a mistake." The sentence sounded genuine, which somehow made it sadder, because genuine regret arrived after consequences, not before. Upton closed his eyes briefly, not from pain, from recognition. He believed she regretted things. The problem was that regret and reversal were not the same thing. Outside headlights moved through the darkness below. Inside the corridor, the building remained silent. Then Vanessa asked the question, the real question, the one hidden beneath everything else. "Can I come home?" There it was, simple, direct, final, no explanations, no speeches, no strategy, just hope, a fragile kind, the kind that appears when options disappear. Upton didn't answer immediately, because easy answers often became wrong answers. He thought about the house, the empty closet, the coffee mugs, the quiet mornings, the months since she left. He thought about the investigations, the documents, the signatures, the choices. Mostly he thought about himself, not the angry version, not the wounded version, the honest version, the one who had spent months rebuilding something stable, something real. Eventually, he spoke, and the answer arrived without anger, without punishment, without triumph. "No!" Vanessa inhaled sharply, but he continued, not cruelly, carefully. "The home you're talking about doesn't exist anymore." The sentence hurt. He knew it would. Truth often did. Yet it remained true. The marriage they once had ended long before the divorce paperwork began, long before Preston, long before the separation, long before the final argument. People rarely noticed endings while they were happening. Only afterward. Vanessa didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice sounded tired, more tired than sad. "Okay." The word barely emerged, then another pause. "I guess I deserve that." "No." Upton looked out across the city. It's not about deserving, because it wasn't. That was the part many people misunderstood. This wasn't revenge. Revenge required anger. Anger had faded months ago. This was simply consequence. Eventually, Vanessa thanked him for listening. The gratitude sounded strange, unexpected. Then the call ended. No dramatic goodbye, no promises, no reconciliation. Just an ending. A real one. Upton lowered the phone. The screen went dark. The corridor remained empty. For several minutes he stood there alone. Not celebrating. Not grieving. Just breathing. Because something important had happened. Not the conversation. Not the apology. The clarity. For the first time since Vanessa left, there were no remaining questions between them. Only outcomes. And outcomes had a way of arriving faster than anyone expected. Especially when investigators were still digging. Especially when documents were still talking. Especially when people who once felt untouchable were beginning to run out of places to hide. The courtroom looked smaller than most people imagined. No dramatic architecture, no thunderous atmosphere, no cinematic tension hanging in the air. Just fluorescent lights, wood-paneled walls, rows of chairs, a state flag near the judge's bench, the kind of room where life-changing decisions happened quietly. Upton arrived 15 minutes early. As always, preparation had become instinct. The final divorce hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. at Wake County Family Court. Outside, winter sunlight reflected off government buildings. Inside, people waited for their names to be called. Custody disputes, property disagreements, protective orders, endings. Every hallway contained endings. Upton sat beside Rebecca Sloan reviewing final documents. Neither spoke much. There wasn't much left to discuss. The major issues had already been negotiated. The marriage itself had been over for months. This hearing existed to formalize reality. Across the room sat Vanessa. For the first time in a long while, she looked uncertain. Not frightened. Not defeated. Simply uncertain. The confidence that once seemed permanent had become fragile. Months earlier, she entered rooms expecting outcomes. Now she entered rooms hoping for them. That difference mattered. Upton noticed another change. Preston Whitmore was absent, completely absent. No supportive appearance, no reassuring presence, no public solidarity. Nothing. Interesting. Very interesting. Judge Eleanor Brooks entered promptly at 9. The room rose, then sat. The hearing began, professional, efficient, direct, exactly as judges preferred. Rebecca handled most of the discussion. Asset division, property distribution, financial disclosures, retirement accounts, routine matters, no surprises, no emotional speeches, no attempts to rewrite history. That alone distinguished the proceeding from many others. Facts occupied center stage. Opinions remained in the audience. The hearing continued smoothly until Vanessa's attorney addressed several disputed financial issues. The argument was predictable. Vanessa had operated under information provided by senior leadership. She trusted organizational processes. She lacked authority over larger financial structures. All technically reasonable points. Perhaps even partially true. The problem was documentation. Documentation had a habit of narrowing possibilities. Rebecca waited patiently, then began presenting records. Not dramatically, not aggressively, one document at a time. Dates, approvals, signatures, transaction histories. The rhythm became almost mechanical. Question, answer, record, confirmation, question, answer, record, confirmation. Upton watched quietly. Years earlier, he might have found satisfaction in the process. Not anymore. Now he simply appreciated accuracy. Judge Brooks reviewed each document carefully. No visible emotion, no visible bias, only attention. The best judges often looked unimpressed by everything. Around mid-morning, one particular authorization received significant scrutiny. The same authorization Rebecca had shown him months earlier, the reimbursement approved before project authorization. The timeline mattered. Because timelines didn't argue. Timelines didn't exaggerate. Timelines simply existed. Vanessa answered questions carefully, professionally. Yet uncertainty appeared repeatedly. Not because she was dishonest, because reality had become complicated. Very complicated. Several times she explained that she relied upon representations made by senior administrators. Again, perhaps true, the judge listened, took notes, asked additional questions. Nothing dramatic, no shouting, no accusations, just process. Meanwhile, outside the family court system, another process was unfolding. A much larger one. The investigation. Over the previous month, several developments had accelerated. Daniel Price resigned, then hired counsel, then stopped speaking publicly. Harold Mercer also departed the foundation. Officially, retirement. Unofficially, nobody seemed convinced. And Preston Whitmore. Preston faced something far worse. Civil actions, regulatory scrutiny, financial reviews. The walls were closing in. Not rapidly, methodically. Methodical pressure was often the most dangerous kind, because it rarely stopped. Back inside the courtroom, the hearing approached conclusion. Rebecca presented final settlement recommendations, property allocation, asset distribution, outstanding obligations, everything organized, everything supported, everything documented. Judge Brooks reviewed the materials for several minutes. The room remained silent. Eventually, she spoke. The decision itself contained no surprises. The marriage would be dissolved, assets divided according to the negotiated framework. No extraordinary awards, no punitive findings, no spectacle. Clean, orderly, final. Exactly what Upton wanted. Exactly what Rebecca had worked toward. For a brief moment, relief passed through the room. Not joy, relief. The difference mattered. Joy celebrated beginnings. Relief acknowledged endings. The hearing concluded shortly afterward. People gathered documents. Attorneys exchanged final comments. Court staff prepared for the next case. Life moved forward, as it always did. Vanessa remained seated longer than expected, watching papers disappear into folders, watching attorneys prepare to leave, watching reality become official. Eventually she stood. Their eyes met briefly across the room. No anger, no hostility, no reconciliation. Just recognition. Recognition that an entire chapter had ended. Then she looked away. The moment passed. Outside the courthouse, winter air felt surprisingly warm. The sky remained clear. Bright sunlight stretched across downtown Raleigh. Rebecca walked beside Upton toward the parking area. For several minutes, neither spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. "How do you feel?" The question seemed reasonable, yet strangely difficult. Upton considered it carefully. Not happy, not sad, not triumphant, not wounded. None of those felt accurate. Eventually he found the correct answer. "Lighter," Rebecca smiled. "That's usually a good sign." They reached the parking lot. Before leaving, she paused. One final observation. The kind experienced professionals occasionally offered after long cases. "You handled this better than most people would." Upton looked toward the courthouse. People entered. People exited. Lives changing continuously. "I had help," Rebecca laughed softly. "That's not what I meant." Perhaps she was right, because many people would have chosen different paths. Public fights, revenge, humiliation, retaliation, emotional warfare. Upton had considered none of those useful. Useful and satisfying were different concepts. Many people confused them. By early afternoon he returned to work. The same campus, the same buildings, the same hallways. Yet everything felt different. News reporters still appeared occasionally. Investigators still reviewed records. Executives still looked nervous. But the uncertainty surrounding his own life had disappeared. That mattered, more than he expected. Near the end of his shift, he walked through the central courtyard. Winter sunlight reflected off the glass research buildings. Employees crossed between structures carrying coffee and laptops. Ordinary scenes, ordinary moments, the type people rarely remembered. Yet, Upton paused. Only briefly, because months earlier he had walked through the same courtyard carrying confusion. Now he carried clarity. The difference felt significant. His phone buzzed once. A news alert, another update involving Preston Whitmore. Additional civil claims, expanded financial reviews, growing pressure. Upton glanced at the notification, then locked the screen without opening it. For a long time, those developments had occupied enormous space in his life. Not anymore. The system would continue. Investigators would investigate. Lawyers would litigate. Judges would decide. The machinery of accountability had finally begun moving. His role inside that process was largely finished, and for the first time in many months that felt enough. He looked across the courtyard one final time, then continued walking, not toward the past, not toward revenge, simply forward. 8 months later, Upton Diaz no longer lived in the same house. The decision had not been emotional. It had been practical. Too many memories occupied the old place. Not painful memories, just completed ones. There was a difference. So after the divorce finalized, he sold the house, paid off the remaining mortgage, and purchased a smaller property outside Durham. 2 bedrooms, a detached workshop, half an acre of land. Quiet. The kind of quiet that belonged to trees instead of empty rooms. Most mornings began the same way. Coffee at sunrise, a short walk along the fence line. Then, work. Not maintenance work anymore, at least not exclusively. Something unexpected had happened after the investigation. People started calling. Hospitals, non-profits, private healthcare groups, compliance departments, law firms, internal audit teams. At first it was occasional. A question here, a consultation there, then referrals multiplied. Word traveled, especially among professionals. Eventually, Upton established a small compliance consulting practice. Nothing flashy. No expensive office, no dramatic branding, just expertise. Clients appreciated that. Most organizations preferred competence over performance. The business grew steadily. Not rapidly, steadily. Again, there was a difference. Steady things tended to last longer. One Friday afternoon, nearly a year after Vanessa walked out beneath the loading dock lights, Upton finished reviewing a vendor audit for a regional healthcare network. The work reminded him of his old career, except now it felt different. Lighter. Years earlier, he had chased advancement. Now, he chased accuracy. The second pursuit proved much more satisfying. Outside, autumn sunlight filtered through oak trees surrounding the property. Leaves covered portions of the driveway. The air carried the first hints of colder weather. His phone buzzed. Email notification. Nothing unusual, except the sender, Vanessa Diaz. Upton stared at the screen. Not surprised. Some part of him had always expected one final message. Not because of romance, because people often wanted the last word, or closure, or understanding. Sometimes all three. He opened the email. No attachment, No legal language, no requests, just a letter. A real letter, longer than he expected. Vanessa wrote about many things. Mistakes, choices, ambition, regret, the investigation, the collapse of Preston's world, the collapse of parts of her own. She admitted things. Not everything. People rarely admitted everything. But enough. Enough to sound honest. Enough to sound human. She described realizing how often she had mistaken attention for value, visibility for importance, status for security. The observations felt genuine, painfully genuine. Perhaps because experience had finally taught them. The letter also mentioned him, frequently. His patience, his consistency, his refusal to become cruel. Several times, Vanessa admitted that his calmness had frustrated her throughout the marriage. Back then, she interpreted it as weakness. Now she saw something else. Strength. Not dramatic strength. Not aggressive strength. The quieter kind. The kind that remained when circumstances changed. The kind that didn't require witnesses. The kind that lasted. Near the end, she apologized. Not for one event. For a pattern. A way of seeing him that had never been fair. The apology felt sincere, which made it valuable. Then came the final paragraph. The part that mattered most. Not because it changed anything, because it didn't. Vanessa wrote that she finally understood what he meant during their last phone call. Reality. She had spent years fighting reality, trying to negotiate with it, redefine it, outrun it. Reality always won. The letter ended simply. I hope you're happy, that's all. No request, no invitation, no hidden agenda, just hope. Upton read the letter twice, then closed the laptop. Outside wind moved through the trees. Leaves drifted across the yard. The afternoon remained quiet. For several minutes he sat alone on the back porch, thinking. Not about Vanessa, not really. About time. About perspective. About the strange ways people misunderstood one another. Eventually he stood, walked inside, opened a filing cabinet. The cabinet contained old records, past projects, completed contracts, personal documents, finished chapters. He placed Vanessa's letter inside a folder, closed the drawer, and that was that. No dramatic gesture, no symbolic destruction, no lingering obsession. The letter belonged to the past, the same place as everything else. Later that evening, he drove into town. The same diner, the same booth. Carol still worked there. Still called everyone Han, still refilled coffee before people asked. Some things never changed. Upton ordered black coffee and a grilled chicken sandwich, then sat quietly near the window. Outside, traffic moved through downtown Durham. Inside, conversations blended together. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. The waitress dropped off the check. You look happy. The comment surprised him. Not because she said it, because she was right. Happy wasn't exactly the correct word. Peaceful felt closer. Content, perhaps. Stable. The emotions lacked drama, which made them more trustworthy. After Carol walked away, Upton looked out the window, and for the first time in many months allowed himself to revisit the sentence. The sentence. The one that began everything. You'll regret not fighting harder for me. He thought about the night Vanessa said it. The loading dock. The donor badge. The rain. The certainty in her voice. Then he thought about everything that followed. The documents. The investigation. The warnings. The courtroom. The phone call. The letter. The endings. All of it. A year earlier, he genuinely didn't know whether she might be right. Regret was complicated. People often confused regret with grief, or loneliness, or disappointment. They weren't the same thing. He had grieved. Certainly. He had been lonely at times. Absolutely. He had felt disappointed, more than once. But regret, that was different. Regret required believing another choice would have produced a better outcome. And after everything that happened, Upton no longer believed that. Fighting harder would not have saved the marriage. It would have prolonged its ending. Begging would not have created love. Competing with Preston would not have restored trust. Refusing reality would not have changed reality. Eventually the truth became simple. Painfully simple. She had made her choice. He had respected it. And respecting it turned out to be the right decision. Outside the diner window, evening settled across Durham. Streetlights flickered on. People hurried home. Life continued, as it always would. Upton finished his coffee, left cash on the table, and walked toward the door. Not carrying anger, not carrying victory, not carrying regret, just carrying the life he had built after everything fell apart. And that life felt remarkably good. The night air greeted him as he stepped outside. Cool, quiet, clean. For a moment he paused beneath the glow of the parking lot lights, then continued walking. Forward. Exactly where he had been headed all along. Some people believe strength is measured by how loudly you fight for someone. Life often teaches a different lesson. Sometimes strength is recognizing when another person has already made their choice. Sometimes strength is staying calm when pride demands a reaction. And sometimes strength is trusting facts, patience, and self-respect more than emotion. Many viewers have probably experienced something similar. Maybe not a divorce, maybe not a betrayal, but a moment when someone expected you to chase, argue, beg, or prove your worth. Those moments can feel overwhelming. Yet, time often reveals something important. Your value was never dependent on convincing someone else to see it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever walked away from someone who expected you to fight for them? Looking back now, do you regret it, or was it the right decision? And if you enjoyed this story, subscribe and join us again tomorrow. The next story begins with a father being excluded from his own daughter's wedding and ends with a secret that changes an entire family.